Hello, and welcome everyone. I'm Susan Minkle. I work for Gradient Learning, which is a nonprofit education organization led by educators that create solutions to meet the holistic needs of every child. I've been at Gradient for about 6 years, and I've spent the last two working on a teacher-student connection builder called Along. And Along was really designed to help teachers know each student. Before I transitioned to this role, supporting teachers, I was a teacher myself. I taught fifth and sixth grade, all subjects, for almost 20 years. And I worked really hard to get to know my students as individuals and to really help them know me, which, as we know, is not always an easy task. So that's why I'm really excited to be working in a role now where I can champion teachers and working on a tool that I'm really excited about, that makes it easier for educators to check in with their students, one-on-one. So we're really excited for our session today. Connections can begin with a simple question, because along we really believe that something small like a question can spark a conversation, a connection, and ultimately community. So let's meet our panel. Will, I'd love to invite you to go ahead and come on camera and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role.
So my name is Will Ruffin II, and I am the Executive Director for Equity and Engagement for Rochester Public Schools. I've been in education for 16 years, and I've had an educational path of volunteer, substitute teacher, paraprofessional, and taught fifth grade for 13 years. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation this morning.
We're so excited to have you here. Natalia, would you go ahead and introduce yourself as well, please?
Buenos días, everyone. Me llamo Natalia Benjamin, and I've taught at Century High School for the past 7 years. I taught multilingual students in ethnic studies for the past couple of years. In 2021, I was named the Minnesota Teacher of the Year, so that has been an extremely rewarding experience. And this year, I'm moving into working with teachers as the coordinator for multilingual learning for the district. So super excited to be here and share my experience.
We're excited to have you. Will's pumping you up. Desiree, last but definitely not least, would you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, thanks, Susan. Hi, everyone. I'm Desiree Stanley. I'm coming to you this morning from cold, foggy San Francisco. It's great to be here. So I work on Along. I'm the senior content manager, which means my job is to work with our partners to create reflection questions and those other materials to really support student-teacher connections, and specifically to really bring a research lens to what we do, bring the science of learning and development to the tool. Before this, my background's actually in science. I was most recently working at Khan Academy on high school, middle school, AP chemistry, all kinds of science. So excited to be here and looking forward to talking with you all.
I'm excited that you're all here. In keeping with the title of today's webinar, actually want to start us off by asking one of the research-informed reflection questions from Along's library. And so I'm going to ask everyone in just a minute, what traditions matter to you and why are they important? Now, as you think about your own personal answer, and by all, I mean everyone out there, not just the panelists, I want to share how I would answer this question. So let's see, what traditions matter? Okay. So I've been thinking about this. It's funny how some things become traditions without us really realizing it, especially as our families grow older. And so I am now the mother of mostly grown children, 19 and 22. And one of our traditions over the last few years has been a family spring break trip. And now that my oldest son is out in the working world, I love that he's already put that spring break trip on his calendar. And so I think it's just wonderful. We gather family and friends and people who love us. We rent a big house and we just have fun being together for a week. And so that's one of the traditions that's really important to me. Now, if we were all together in a room, I'd ask participants to stand up and to pair up with someone that was seated close to them and share their response to that question with each other. But since we can't all be together, I'd love if all of you would share your answers in the chat. And so I'm excited to see the chat sort of light up. What traditions matter to you and why are they important? So think about that, and I'm excited to see your answers in the chat. Church attendance on Sundays, yep. What traditions and why do they matter to you? Why are they important? And when you've added your own answer to the chat, take a few minutes to start to scroll through some of the other responses as well. The chat is lighting up, but I saw the word donuts, and so I just needed to call that out because it's donuts. See a lot of trends here around family time and just being together with family. If you haven't had a chance to share your response yet, please do so. What traditions matter to you and why are they important? And so we'll do about 30 more seconds. Thank you for the reminder, Christine. Make sure that you hit to everyone instead of just to hosts and panelists when you're sharing your tradition. I have a feeling some great ones have gotten stuck in that. Oh my gosh, thanks for all of these really great answers. I'm going to go ahead and move this forward. Before I sort of wrap this up, I just want to point out, did you notice that just by answering a simple question, and I often refer to them as seemingly simple, right? It just feels like a simple question, that you learned a lot about each other. I also learned a lot about myself when I reflect as well. And I think that's really the power of connections. It can start really small and they can build through the school year. So each of our panelists today have a really unique perspective about how the simple action of something like answering a question can positively impact our students. We have a great conversation lined up for today, but I also want to make sure that we leave space to hear from the audience. So make sure that if you have a question, you add it in the Q&A feature so that the folks can raise it up to us to answer. And if you have a question for a specific person on the panel, be sure to include their name so that we know. So let's get started. Let's go back. What traditions matter to you? Why are they important? How does this question really help form a connection with students? Will, I want to start with you. How do you think that really forms a connection with students?
Sure. I think as I was reading all of the answers in the chat, it was already making a connection with me in my childhood. So thank you to everyone who was talking about family trips and eating breakfast for dinner. That's one of my favorite things to do. And then a special shout out to, I think it was Anna from LA. I'm also from Los Angeles, so just a special shout out to you as well. When I think about traditions for myself, I think about something that's simple, but it's close to the heart, which is my name. I'm named after my father, who is Will Ruffin, and I'm Will Ruffin II. And I named my son Will Ruffin III. And I actually got my son's nickname from a student when I was substitute teaching in class. So I was just being an excited first-time father and sharing about that with the class. And I remember a student, she raised her hand and she said, well, if you're going to call him the third, then you should call him Trey. And I just fell in love with that name. I loved it. So now my son actually goes by Trey. So just by me sharing a little bit of myself in the classrooms with the students, I actually have a little bit of them every day, being that's my son. So I think of teachers in the classroom, it's okay to be vulnerable and let our guards down and speak about things that are important to us and for us, because that's going to form deeper relationships and deeper bonds with the students in our classroom. And also it shows them that being vulnerable is okay. And they may, if they choose to step into that vulnerable space and share some really important things with you as well. So I think something as simple as a name, spelling the name correctly, getting to learn how to pronounce names correctly is a really good first step for all educators when trying to build a relationship with their students.
Thank you so much for sharing that. The story about your son and Trey, that is so special. Yes, you're getting some love in the chat. I want to, before I move on to Natalia, I want to point out something you said about educators being vulnerable, but then opening up that space if students want to share. So I really appreciate that you put that out there. Like, we're going to put ourselves out there, and relationships, kids are different, right? So they might step into that space at different times. So I appreciate you calling that out. Okay. Natalia, I'm curious how you think about that traditions question, right?
Yeah, I think like many people in the chat, the things that come to mind are holidays, and then my family is all about getting together in the kitchen and preparing the food, cooking, teaching those traditional foods that we do for special occasions. And then of course, sharing that meal together. And a lot of times back home, we do fireworks and we do all that together. And so to me, it's that theme of togetherness and family. And I think an important part of the question is the why piece, right? Not just what traditions are important, but why. And I think when we maybe reiterate that follow-up question with our students, it helps us to find that common thread between us, where maybe the traditions are different, maybe we eat different foods, maybe the things that are important to us are different, but you'll find that a lot of the reasons of the why had to do with people, right? People or moments that are important, and a lot of those help us connect each other so that we can see each other. And in my class, I have varied languages, people that come from all different places. And so as we share our different traditions, yes, we learn about each other, we learn the things that are important to each other, but then we can make that connection of, at the end of the day, you know, oftentimes family is the thing that is important to us, or friends, or spending that time together. And I think that helps us connect at a deeper level.
I appreciate you sharing that so much. JBF in the chat just pointed out that whole bi-directional piece, right? Yes, couldn't be more. Desiree, from your lens, I'm curious, it seems like a simple question, right? We just asked about traditions and why they're important. How do you feel, you know, like, how does that help form connection with students?
Yeah, thanks, Susan. So I can elaborate on what we've all already been saying, which is, you know, we know from the science of learning development tells us really when you as a student and a teacher, or really any two people, are forming a relationship, it's really important to feel like you have, for each individual, right, to feel like they have control over how much they want to share, how personal they want to be, how vulnerable they want to be, and when. So a question like what traditions are important to you and why provides a real opportunity for students to have that power. So I, as a student, could say, I love Sunday pizza night dinner. You know, Dad and I make dinner together. It's really fun. I love pizza. Like, that's why this is so fun for me. If I want to share a little bit more, I can say, it's been especially important to me lately because Dad's been traveling a lot for work, and this is the time that we get to spend together. So as a student, I really have that ability to form the beginnings of a connection, or continue to let you get to know me if I feel comfortable.
I appreciate you sharing that. Like, I always think about all of that. Well, I always overthink everything is what I'm told, but like, I try to think about, you know, all of the different responses that a student might give and how I might respond to that, you know, because I think it's important to kind of know maybe what's coming. You know, asking a question seems small, but small actions can make a big difference. Natalia, I'm curious, do you have a few other like seemingly small actions that you take to really help your students feel welcome and like they belong in your classroom?
Yeah, I wanted to share a quick activity that we do. In the past couple of years, I knew it was important to be intentional about giving the students opportunities to make connections and to talk and to get to know each other. And I also knew that if I didn't have the routines in place to do that, that would not happen because there's too much to take care of in the classroom. And so we always started class with the choice board, and the choice board had, they got to pick whether it was breathing or talking to each other or something. They got to pick how we started class. So we had time to do these. One of my classes was mostly juniors and seniors, which was interesting. So they had already known each other for a while before they came to my class. And yet one of their favorite things to do was to pick the one-on-one interviews. And so they would get a couple minutes, each, they partner up and each person would get a minute, and we throw a couple questions on the board and they just get to talk. And that was one of their favorite things to do. And it was so fun to see them talk to each other and be like, oh wait, I also play the violin. Or I didn't know you play soccer. It's like, yeah, I played soccer in my life. And then I stopped, in high school or whatnot. And so they discover all these things that they had in common that they didn't know about each other, when they often see themselves only, doing math or in specific scenarios. And so I love that little things like, hey, we'll just take 2 minutes for you guys to talk to each other about yourselves was something that was important to them. And they kept picking that one a few times over the course of the semester. So that was kind of fun to see that.
I appreciate you sharing that. I always think about time, right? Think about the time it took us to answer a question in the chat, just a couple of minutes. Think about the time it takes to allow students to do that, and how important it is. Desiree, I'm always going to ask you to put your science hat on, right? Like the research behind it. What do we know about how the power behind choice for students? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, thanks. And there's a question or a comment in the chat that I'm going to try to tie into this this little segment here as well, Susan. So when we think about choice, it really gives students both that ability to create a safe space or decide for themselves what safe is, like we were just talking about, but it's also a way to share power, right? We know one of the partners that Along works with is the Search Institute, and they have a developmental relationships framework that really emphasizes the power of sharing power with your students and the ability, what that gives them in terms of confidence in themselves, confidence in the relationship, and really, the ability to grow and flourish. And I think Fiona put a comment in the chat about how, when we think about what kind of questions or what kind of conversation we want to have with students, it is possible to inadvertently alienate students. So she mentioned the idea that a question like, what did everyone do for summer vacation, posed to the whole class for everyone to answer in front of each other, can really highlight inequities of what you had the money to do this summer. And so when we think about this, the power of this kind of one-to-one bi-directional reflection that we're creating space for, it allows me to share with my teacher without feeling concerned about what all the other students are going to think. And really the questions themselves, like we were just talking about, are kind of designed to make it possible to answer in a number of different ways without drawing attention to yourself that you don't want.
I appreciate you calling that out. I think, when we talk about what Along is and how it works, I think sometimes it's kind of hard to imagine, but I'm with you. What I love about Along is I am choosing a question. I'm sharing a little bit about myself with all of my students, but they can choose to share back with me however much they want, but it only comes to me, right? So there are different kinds of connections that we want to form. And so there's that connection between the teacher and students. And then Natalia is also talking about, okay, how do we also open up space for students to be able to connect with each other? And I think something that we've all learned in the last couple of years is that has felt missing somehow. And so us giving space for that is super important. Will, I'm curious, what does it look like? Because I know part of your role is being in the schools in your district. What does it look like in a school when when their teachers do prioritize that relationship, when they take just a little bit of time to do that? What does it sound like? What does it feel like?
I think it looks and sounds a lot better than it did a year ago, right? So with our students being back in schools, we're starting to get some of that life back into school. I don't think we're completely back to normal, we're redefining what that is. But I know that normal wasn't what it looked like and what it sounded like before. So last year, as I walked around schools, it was very quiet. Students were separated from each other. There was no one in the hallways. Students separated during lunchtime in the cafeteria. It just didn't feel like school at all. So walking around the hallways this year feels a lot better, right? So I think the hallways can tell the story of the school, right? So just walking through the hallway last year, we could feel that something was off. And now this year, we can see people giving high fives again, or giving the elbow bumps now if they don't want to have that hand-to-hand contact. And some people even giving hugs again. And I think that is telling the story of like, we are trying to reconnect with one another, because that's what we missed, right? You can see student artwork hanging in the hallway again. And the artwork isn't just your typical, my student drew a picture. It seems like it's more detailed to whatever's going on in the classroom. The stuff that's in the hallway is more representative of different people, not just one type of person or one culture. So I think we're getting back to what we need. We're seeing that representation matters. We're seeing that our connections matters. And it just feels really good to have our students back in school so that we can start to reconnect with one another again.
I appreciate you saying that. And yes, the new normal, right? Redefining that, what is that? And I think it's something that we'll continue to do this year as well. Natalia, I'm curious, in your own classroom, like, how do you know that relationships are being built, right? Like, no student's gonna like sit down and write you, thank you for building a relationship with me, right? But like, there are signs that we can see. What are some of the signs that you look for that let you know that you are making that connection with students?
Yeah, definitely. I think, there's a lot more fist bumps and just students seeking that physical touch in healthy ways. And then just the nature of the conversations that are happening in the classroom, students being willing to come and share why something's happening or not happening in the classroom, why they didn't get an assignment done, or their struggles a little bit. Oftentimes, I feel like if students are willing to take risks sharing about themselves, right, and we're doing that in a social setting, they're also more willing to take risks in academic tasks. And so they're more willing to raise their hand, or they're more willing to speak up or to take a risk when we're doing read alouds or doing something else that they wouldn't otherwise if they didn't feel that there was a relationship, not only with me as a teacher in the classroom, but also with their peers within the classroom. And so I love seeing how that develops right from the first day of school to a few weeks later, where those conversations start happening. And then the students feel more comfortable just doing what we do in class.
I was just thinking, I was just remembering a story from my own time in the classroom. I had one student in particular who was super shy. She spoke to almost no one, right? She spoke to her best friend, and that was about it. It was almost like best friend was translator, but she found a way to communicate with me. So she would send me a lot of messages, or she would let me know, like later in the afternoon, she would send me an email or a message. Hey, could you sit beside me tomorrow and explain something? Right. And so it wasn't verbal, but I felt like I knew her and I felt like I communicated because that was the way that she communicated. And I remember toward the end of the year walking into my co-teacher's classroom, and I heard this voice that I don't think I'd ever heard before. And they were sharing projects. And so they were all watching a video on a screen, and it was the student, because she was comfortable hitting record. And so she had recorded herself and they're watching it, but she would never have done that live and in person. And so I just think about the different ways that we could communicate with each other, and giving space for that, and the time to open up. Desiree, I'm going to come to you. The title of the webinar, Connections Can Begin with a Simple Question. But I also know that a lot of thought went into the questions that we have in the tool. And I know it's something that folks were thinking about, Fiona, especially earlier. So how did we add along? How did we come up with these specific questions?
Yeah, great question, Susan. I can see people are brainstorming in the chat as well. There are a lot of different questions you could ask a student and share in this kind of bi-directional reflection. But what we've really done to sort of organize our work is, like I mentioned, we have a research-based framework that we're working in. So we're thinking about what the research tells us works in terms of building developmental relationships. But we've also partnered with a number of organizations, really a diverse slate of partners who can tell us what they know works. So not just theoretically, but what they've seen really work in practice with the populations that they work with. So that includes Black Teachers Collaborative and Understood.org, who focuses on individuals with learning differences. And what they've really been able to do is help us come up with questions that, one, as a teacher, you can model your reflection, show some vulnerability, invite students in, as kind of Will was describing at the top of the hour here. And also questions that, any number of different students can feel comfortable answering and really show themselves to you, allow that authentic relationship development to come up, and really avoid, as people are pointing out, the number of different little trapdoors we can fall through and start off on the wrong foot. So to kind of sum that up, what I'm saying here is we're using both theoretical academic research as well as the lived experience of partners we work with to really hopefully build something that'll work for everyone.
Can you, I'm curious, because you said lived experience and partners, can you talk a little bit about the partners that we work with? Because I think it's important to help realize, that we have looked for input from others because it's so important, as people have noted.
Yeah, so one partner that we've worked with is, I mentioned Understood.org, and they're really focused on how best to support individuals, not only students, but in this case, we're thinking about students with various learning differences. And they've really helped us think about, how can we write a question that's concrete and literal enough that any student will understand what's being asked of them? And how can we provide some tips to the teacher about how best to, when is this question appropriate? What kind of follow-up might various students that you have need? So whether that's a question about what's a goal you'd like to accomplish this year, or a question about who's an important person in your life, or who do you enjoy spending time with, whatever kind of topic you as the teacher feel is appropriate at this time, our partners have helped us kind of have your back in terms of thinking about what's the best way to go about having this conversation.
I grinned at your phrase, have your back, because I think that's really important, right? Like, how do we support educators? I mean, that is my whole job, right? How do we support educators and make sure that they have the tools they need, that they know we have their back? Well, Desiree just talked a little bit about the questions and the research behind the questions. And I'm curious, what role do you see a tool like Along in making strides to help form relationships in your district with students?
Is that for me? Sorry, I didn't hear that part.
That's okay.
I think I could see Along being a good tool for many ways. So just thinking about how we're trying to reconnect with students once again, right? If you have a student who is maybe slower to come back to that transition of getting used to the classroom again, this could be a way for a teacher to have a one-on-one conversation with that student. Maybe you have a student who doesn't always get called on when they're raising their hands because the other people are more excited and they seem to get called on more often than they do. So this could be a pathway for that student to still share what they wanted to share at the classroom, or to have their teacher listen to them. Or actually, it doesn't even have to be a teacher. Maybe there's a social worker or a counselor that didn't get to meet with this student, and they can connect with them in a one-on-one setting. So I just think Along provides many pathways for the one-on-one connections that our students need, that we don't always get to in the everyday setting as an educator. So that's how I would answer
that. I appreciate that you, I was driving home in the car was my space, right? I know a lot of educators do that too, and I would constantly replay the day. Did I even talk to everyone today? And I mean, like, actually speak to every single student. I call it the science show, and I did the science show 3 times a day for quite a few years. And I appreciate that you called out that we may not have heard from everyone in the day. And so how do we make sure that we connect with our students in that way? Natalia, I know you've used Along in your classroom. I'm curious if you have a story to share about how that one-on-one connection has impacted either students as a whole or even one specific student. Without saying names, we wouldn't do that.
Yeah, no, I think of those one-on-one interactions as little deposits, right? You're building that trust, and every interaction, every positive interaction that you're having is letting the students know that you're listening and that they can count on you and that you're there. And so when you do that over time, they're willing to reach out and tell you what they need. And so whether they are coming and say, hey, can I talk to you later? And they share whether, they're having a hard time. Maybe their parents are going through a divorce and that's really hard on them. And they're trying to figure out what supports do I have, or they're struggling with their mental health, or I work with high schoolers. So there's a lot of relationship stuff going on with friends and significant relationships and stuff. And that's hard on them. And the reality is that they face a lot of life things that are going on. And so I don't take it for granted, and it's very meaningful that students come and they're willing to reach out, and I can either say, hey, let's find you some resources, or have you thought about talking to so-and-so, and just help connecting them with whatever they need so that they can be successful in the classroom. But at the end of the day, I always tell them, right, they're more important than any assignment, and so making sure that they're safe and that they have what they need is priority number one. And I think that helps them in the long run so that they can achieve their goals and graduate high school, because that's what we want.
I think if we've realized nothing else in the last few years, right, it's that we all bring our whole selves, right? We bring our whole selves to work, we bring our whole selves to school. And I remember being a baby teacher, right, new in the classroom, and I remember for whatever reason I had learned in teacher school to say things like this to a student, and I remember saying it. Hey, Will, when you're with me, like you're safe, and we're going to do math, and I know you had a tough morning, or I know that something happened yesterday after school, but like we're going to leave that outside the classroom door, and when you come in my classroom, we're just going to do math. I see you shaking your head. I remember saying that to kids, and I look back on that now and I think how ridiculous that was, because adults can't compartmentalize in that way. And yet we were asking children to compartmentalize in that way. So Natalia, I appreciate you very much bringing up that everything that we do impacts our ability to learn in a classroom, and that I can't be as effective a teacher as I want to be if I don't know that something is going on with that student and can't maybe connect them with what they need. So I also want to hit the elephant in the room, right? Time. Because teachers have a whole lot to do in the day. And so I want to think about how can we prioritize building relationships when there are like very real time constraints. Will, I'm curious how you're thinking about that.
Well, I think if anyone is thinking about using a tool like Along, I would try to think about those maybe 1 or 2 students, or maybe 5, a smaller number of students that you've had trouble connecting with. Like, I just can't seem to get through to this student, right? For whatever the reason is. And then I would start there, right? So as you're learning about them throughout the day, think about how you can use what you're learning to maybe peek a little bit more into their interest through a question from Along, right? So I mentioned you talked about your name in classroom. Is there another story about your name that you didn't get to share? Is there another piece? Where did you get your name from? Just using a name as an example. But you can use what you're learning about the students in the classroom to kind of probe a little bit more and open that door for that. I think someone used bi-directional relationship. I love that term. Whoever said that, thank you. But it opens the door for that. But then they choose to respond or not. But I think the adult being intentional in reaching out is what's important, right? Them knowing that the door is open whenever they choose to walk through it, if they choose to walk through it, is important. So if you're thinking about Along and you're not quite sure, maybe roll it out with a small group of people, or maybe one student at a time until you get a feel for it. And then you can throw some of the larger questions out to the entire classroom. But I would think about starting small.
I appreciate you sharing that. Desiree, I saw you nodding a lot. Do you want to chime in a little bit there?
Yeah, I think this idea of starting small is really the right way to go. I was also thinking about what, the conversation you and Natalia just had about our whole selves, right? Students are bringing their whole selves to school and educators are bringing them. We're all human beings, right? We're human beings all the time. And so thinking about what truly is manageable, like Will saying, if it feels like the highest need is there's a couple of students who could really use some relationship building with you, and that's the amount of time that you have in your mental bandwidth and your literal time, minutes in the day, like that's the place to start and really think about what I'm trying to say here is not put your needs all the way at the bottom of the list, right? Think about what's going to work for both you as a person and for your students as people, and it's a two-way street.
I just want to add one more thing.
Please do.
And I think that we always think about sometimes relationship as being something additional, something extra that we have to do. And to me, it's the foundation of everything we do. When I am building a relationship with students, I am creating routines, I'm creating ways of communication, I'm creating things that are also going to help me when I get to the content piece. And so it's not separate. This relationship piece is a way of learning. It's a way of being. It's a way of having community in the classroom. And so it's not an additional thing. It should be what we do. In one of the ethnic studies sessions that I was in a few weeks ago, they talked about the relationships is the pedagogy. That is our way to reach our students. And so to me, it's so important to just build that time in, because it will pay off 100 times later on.
You got some snaps from Will there as you were saying that. Yeah, I think a lot of times when I was a teacher and even now, I think about how I want to do something, and Will, you called it intentionality, right? And I think that's the key, right? It's intentionality and it's routines. I think about the lists that I make, and if I don't make a list, then it probably doesn't happen. And so, something like asking this question or taking up, that space is not for every day, right? Like a lot of times we have bell ringers, and along could be something like a daily bell ringer, but it doesn't have to be. So we think that reflection, just that opportunity to open up, even once a week with students, is enough. And to Will's point earlier, student might reply, they might not reply, but it doesn't mean that you sharing didn't have an impact. And it doesn't mean that they wouldn't reply next time. So it's really about opening up that doorway and being able to leave space for that for students. My team is adding a few extra questions for us. If you haven't had a chance to share a question with us and it's something that's on your mind, I'd love to encourage you to do that. And I'm going to start taking a few that I see that, thank you, Christine, who is behind the scenes, has put in for us. So panelists, I'm going to raise the question, and anybody who feels, like they'd like to chime in, please let me know. So one of the questions that I see here is, how do you respond to teachers who believe that relationship building isn't important? And I'm actually going to take that one for just a second, and then I'd love to hear others chime in. So I think a lot about this in my work, and I don't know that it's a belief that relationships aren't important so much as it is not sure how to do it, or not sure how small an action can be to build a relationship. And here's what I mean by that. I hear sometimes teachers, or not teachers, but non-educators say things like, well, teachers know how to build relationships with students, and they just brush it off and it's an aside. And I think that does a disservice to all of us, because no one pulled me aside in teacher school and gave me a course on how to build relationships with all students in the room. And then there are other people who think you just have it or you don't, right? Oh, well, she's just good at building relationships with kids. Oh, I'm just not good at building relationships with kids. But you can actually learn how to build relationships with kids. And so I think that's something I'm really proud of with Along. I call it fake it until you make it. Which is sharing that reflection and being vulnerable helps you build that relationship, even if you're not sure how to do it. And so that was sort of a non-response to the question. But I'm curious if any of the other panelists, the question was, how do you respond to teachers who believe that relationship building is not important?
I'm wondering if we have maybe a narrow view of what relationship building is. Like maybe we think that relationship building is this one thing and we have to have these deep conversation and this elaborate way of doing relationship building. And I think we need to realize that we all do relationships in different ways. And so how I feel comfortable doing relationships in my classroom may be very different how Mr. Ruffin does in his classroom. And so finding what works for you is important. Finding what feels authentic to you is important. And we all do relationships. So I would ask that person, how do you do relationships with people? And how can you apply that to the classroom? Because there's no one way to do it. And I think it's important to reflect on what works for me, because that may be very different than what works for other people.
Yeah, I would add on to that too, Susan, if we have a minute before you move on to the next question. But I think I could also imagine that feeling of, it's not my job to be the school counselor, right? I'm not a psychologist, like I'm a teacher. Maybe there's training I need to be able to talk about feelings that I don't have. Maybe I feel like I don't know how to do this. I saw a question in the chat of, what if students are asking about a school shooting or some other like major event where you don't have the answer. You can't say something that's going to make them feel like, okay, actually everything in the world is fine, right? But the thing is, no one has that answer. That's not the job. The power of building a relationship isn't that you as the teacher can solve all of their problems or assuage all of their worries. It's that they know that you care, and there's somebody at school who cares about them. And so I think the idea of, what does it mean to focus on relationship building, to free ourselves from some perfect model or years and years of graduate school counseling training that we feel like we might need to have in order to do this? Like, no, it's about being a person, and who you are as a person is sufficient to do that.
I think about it like parenting. When I first brought my son home, there was no instruction manual on how to care for this child, right? So you can either learn by doing, you can learn by asking people, you can learn by reading books, but the one thing you don't do is nothing. Like, you have to try something, right? And as you're trying something, you're going to mess up, and just knowing that messing up is okay, right? But each time you mess up, you're also learning something. Okay, that wasn't right. I need to try something different. Right? So as you're spending more time with people, as you're understanding what that cry means, that cry is different when they're hungry from when they need to be fed, right? But that's also a basic need that that child needs. When you're interacting with the students in your classroom, you're going to learn how to listen for what their basic needs are and what they need at that time. So I would say, yes, we're not counselors, yes, we're not social workers, but we also have to be what that student needs us to be at that moment in time. That doesn't mean we have to be that every day, but this is what they need right now, right? So I saw a question come up about, how do you talk about school shootings for people who may not know how to? If you don't know how to, I think the one thing that we can do is listen. Listen to how the students feel about this. What's going on in your mind when you're thinking about safety at school? We don't have to have the answers, but we can validate their feelings at that moment in time. And it's okay to say, I don't know. Can we look this up together? Can we see how other schools are learning how to keep their students safe? Maybe you turn that into a mini research project. I don't know, but I do know, like, you have to start with listening. That's what I would say.
I'm not even sure where to, yes. Vulnerability and starting with listening, right? We can't we can't support if we don't know or if we don't ask. And I noticed something else in the chat that it's like attention, right? Like we can't spend all day every day, right? But we also can't not spend a few minutes when it matters. And so I think it's that balance, and how do we find that? And Will, thank you for saying that. We don't have to have all the answers. So I think that for teachers, that core statement, relationships are not, full stop, is something that I know was hard for me, right? Like I don't have to have all the answers. My job is to support students to learn. That doesn't mean I know everything. And so when we can look at a student and say, you know, actually, I don't know, that is really powerful. I'm looking at a few of the other questions in the chat. Will, I have one for you, which is about really thinking about how you manage initiatives in a district. So we got a question about how do you build alignment across initiatives. You know, districts sometimes have a lot going on, and so how do we think about incorporating something like along a relationship building and not have it feel like one more thing or just another initiative? I see lots of nodding.
Sure. I mean, there is a thing as initiative fatigue, right? So we don't want to do that at all. But I think what we're trying to do is listen to our families and listen to our students and listen to our teachers, and then have their voices shape our priorities, right? So we knew coming back, because we surveyed the students and we surveyed parents, and we had multiple in-person forums about what they felt they needed more of. And a lot of social time, connecting with peers, connecting with each other, that sort of thing, led us to look for another tool that we can try to provide for students and families. So I think we have to listen to people. We can't just assume that we know all the answers, because we don't, right? And then also looking for what's best practice as far as research, right? So what are other schools doing? What are other districts doing in this area of connectivity? And then mirroring the two together. Best practice says this, our student body and parents are asking for this, and then that becomes your priority. Anything outside of those things can wait another year or can wait another 2 years. But right now, this is the need that's in front of us. So this is what we're going to focus on. So right now in our school district, we're focusing on belonging. How do we make sure all of our students, families, and staff feel like they belong in every space that they're at in Rochester Public Schools? Anything outside of that is secondary. Belonging is now our primary focus. So all the tools, all the initiatives must focus on belonging. If they don't, we'll catch you next time.
I appreciate everything, everything you just said, especially the belonging piece. As you were talking, I was thinking about mission and vision, right? Does a district, does a school have a mission? Like, what is it that they want from their students to support? And I am a very mission-driven person as well. A lot of my colleagues know that I have things on my cork board over here. And it is the core of what I think about all day, every day. And just like you said, Will, if it's not over here, then I don't need to be focusing on that, because that is not the core of why I got up today, right? And I also want to address initiative fatigue, right? Like I was that teacher who was like, oh God, this is just another initiative and it's going to go away and we'll learn this thing. But relationships don't go away, right? Wanting students to belong doesn't go away. And so I think about how do we weave that into our daily practice. I'm looking to see if we have any other questions in the chat. La, 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 la.
I see one question from multilingual learners, and I'll just be really brief about it.
No need to do your thing. Go.
So I think, Will, you were talking about how making sure everybody feels like they belong, and when we're sharing about things, right, it can be easy to feel like you don't belong because it's hard to share what you're thinking. And so I always make sure that there's some thinking time ahead of the questions. And so I think this is why it's so important to have this extra 2 minutes to have them write some thoughts down. I have them write it in whatever language they're comfortable with, because I just want their ideas on the paper. I'm not grading you, I'm not assessing you, just write down your thoughts in whatever language works for you. And then I can give them sentence starters to share back. And if all they want to share is one word, great. And if they want to skip, that's okay, because eventually they'll be comfortable enough to have the language to share. And so having that option to pass is important. And then make so that they don't feel that uncomfortable feeling of, oh, I'm gonna mess up if I don't say it right. But they have that piece, and they're already sharing with you in writing if you're doing it through along. And that's a way for them to contribute. And so having multiple ways for them to access that can be helpful. Hopefully that helps.
I was just looking in the chat. Christine, thank you for raising Fiona's words in the chat. The most important words during times of struggle are me too. Simply knowing we're heard has an immediate impact. And I think that goes along with what you were saying, Natalia. Like, I might not read everything that, like, it's more important for them to say it sometimes, right? Or I talked with a teacher a few weeks ago, and she allows students to journal. If they turn down the page, it's the sign that they don't want it read, right? They just need to say it, but they don't want it read. And sometimes, you know, just opening the door and allowing students the space to come in, it is really important, just knowing that we're heard. We heard something from a few teachers that we were talking with a few weeks ago that I think is relevant here. So as teachers, it's hard. Like, if we put something into the world, we want, if I ask 25 students a question, then I want 25 students to respond, right? But I see the smiling from Natalia, but that might not always be the case. Maybe only 15 respond to that question. It doesn't mean don't send another one. It means maybe that only resonated with 15, or 15 wanted to respond that day. And so we had a teacher that said, you know, I keep sending questions, but my students almost never respond. And I think she was feeling kind of down about it. And then she said, but the one day I didn't send it on Tuesday when they expected it is when they asked me why I didn't send it. And so just because they weren't responding doesn't mean that they weren't watching or that it didn't have an impact, right? And so I just want to remind us, like, we open that door, and it might not be somebody hitting reply in a long or hitting reply on a text message. It doesn't mean that they weren't impacted by what we said. I'm going to go ahead and start to close this out. First of all, I want to thank all of our panelists for taking the time today and for sharing. And if those of you out there would like to share any love in the chat, this is definitely a time when we should share the love as educators with other educators. I'm getting tongue-tied. So feel free to say your thank yous. And if you're interested in along, let's see if we could put up the slide. Thank you. If you're interested in learning more about Along, you can create a free account at along.org. It's super simple to get in and get started. If you're not sure you're ready to get started with students yet, that's okay. Just creating an account lets you see all of the great questions that Desiree was talking about, and all of the other content that we have there. And you can also reach out to the Along team. There's a little support button in the bottom right corner if you have questions for us as well. And with that, I want to thank everybody for the robust discussion today and for giving us the space to talk about something that I think is really, really important. So thank you all.